if the church can no longer attract
What is up? Testing. Yeah, my audio is showing up. Good. How's it going, guys? Gonna be doing a response vid today. Nice response vid time to the Deflate YouTube channel. I think it used to be called Deflate Atheism. He has not done a very successful job of deflating atheism, but we're gonna try it out. Full screen YouTube. God damn it, this is my Discord one. Here, browser image cap. Nope. This one. Browser source. I think it's browser source. Image. Window cap. And MS Edge. Here, actually, wait. This go like this. Hey guys, Percy, James in Twitch. Like full screen. That works. That works fine. That works fine. B. Here. And transform. Flip horizontal. Hey, now I'm looking at him. Little tree there. Little pretty tree there. Bigger. Alrighty. Let's get the party started. Is it Jordan Peterson? It is Jordan Peterson, but we're not looking at Jordan Peterson. We're looking at the Deflate YouTube channel. Deflate channel.
Something that's happening in our culture that's not sitting right with you. Okay, how do you defend the damn culture against it without making the claim that we do have something of, let's say, higher value that is the consequence of following a particular tradition?
I recently watched this fascinating conversation between Jordan Peterson and Stephen Fry, in which they agreed that religious stories not only underlie our cultural values, but even guide us to truth. What made their discussion so intriguing is what the two men believe. Fry is an atheist and a moral relativist, while Peterson has not only opened himself up to Christianity, but also defends the idea of an objective moral realm. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the main points of their conversation and show you how Peterson's challenge to Fry captures the key dilemma atheists are faced with. My name is Lucas, by the way, and this is my channel Deflate, which challenges skeptics.
It's the key dilemma. We're going to look forward to this as the atheists. Key dilemma the atheists face. Exciting.
Strengthens believers and creates a space for awesome discussions about God. So both Peterson...
Hey guys, how's it going? I'm doing pretty good. Kind of bored, actually. But, wait, you go in the video.
Peterson and Fry affirm the power of religious narratives and myths, which is the main topic of...
Well, I mean, duh. Like, clearly religious myths have power. That's why billions of people believe them. So obviously they have power. Which isn't a good thing.
Their conversation. But from there, they follow two completely different trajectories. By the end of this video, I will show that Fry's atheism leads him into the logical dead end that many atheists find themselves in.
Whoa, this is going to be good. Exciting. We're going to find out the atheist dead end. Ooh.
Let's get started. In case you don't know Stephen Fry, he's a British intellectual, actor, writer, and comedian with a very long list of impressive accomplishments. His passion is to tell and explore stories as a means to unearth the truth about human nature. What is interesting, if not shocking to some, is that he describes this endeavor as part of his commitment to empiricism.
I'm an empiricist, and I think that's part of my love of drama and myth and story and literature and history even, is these are all to do with experience, with human experience, the register of human experience, of testing an idea against what actually happens and how people actually behave.
As far as Jordan Peterson is concerned, the power of myths and narratives to unlock truth is one of the central themes, if not the central theme, in his thinking and speaking. And it's the very thing that got him to engage with religious thought in general and Christianity in particular. Here is what he says in response to Fry.
The reason I got interested in religious thinking, I went down the pathway that you're describing. I mean, that's why I got interested in religious thinking. Because from a psychological perspective, I mean, the first thing that I realized, and I believe this is what you just pointed out, is that there are truths embedded in fiction, for example, or in spectacle, ritual, drama. And, well, then you ask, well, what is it? Those are attractive and they're entertaining and they automatically engage our interest. But way more than that, they're also that which culture centers itself around.
Now, it's fascinating that Fry, who is far more critical of religious claims than Peterson is, and even explicitly describes himself as an atheist, is nevertheless fully convinced that religious stories and rituals have great potential to explain reality.
Not just literature, but ceremony and ritual are extremely important in understanding everything. And you don't have to be religious to believe in ritual. I love liturgy. I love church liturgy. I'm absolutely passionate about hymns and psalms and the Eucharist and the language of it.
He then gets to the bottom of why he thinks that religious ceremonies and stories are such powerful tools, and I really love the way he puts it.
And there are magnificent shortcuts available if you look at ceremony and the dramatization of human issues, rather than attempting to abstract some essence from them.
So, according to Fry, religious ceremonies and stories are shortcuts to understanding reality.
Duh. Like, that was the kind of the whole point. They were made up stories to give us a clear understanding of things we didn't understand. So it was a shortcut. Most of them are wrong, but yeah, they're shortcuts for sure. They give us a vague, ambiguous idea of something similar to reality. That's it.
What he means by that, I think, is that they have far greater potential to guide us to truth than the rationalist project of describing reality by identifying principles or rules behind everything.
Yeah, instead of let's not go with rationalism and try to understand principles and rules. Nah, we're gonna go with myth and legend and stuff. That's clearly a better method. Great job, bro. I think you're on the right path on this one.
Having laid the groundwork, Peterson and Fry then move on to talk about how even the project of modern science is best understood as a narrative and one with a redemptive arc, because it is ultimately rooted in the human drive to prolong life into eternity. Aware that this view may be challenging to some, they mention Richard Dawkins, who most of us would consider to be opposed to such an interpretation.
Yes, science is meant to solve problems for humans. Yeah.
Of science. But Fry, who is friends with him, offers a more nuanced perspective on Dawkins by saying,
and I could argue that Richard's presentation, his passion is real, his love of science is real, his love of the joy and the wonder of discovery is real. He's written books on wonder, which is a huge and marvelous and much underexplored human quality.
And a primary religious instinct.
Yes.
Picking up on the topic of wonder, Fry briefly talks about the astonishing fact that even though there are great differences between human beings and all the different plants and animals, We find one single DNA code which is shared across all living organisms. Yet, when thinking about the wonder of us being a part of a continuum of life, as Fry calls it, what turns out to be even more astonishing is that human beings are the only ones who experience wonder.
And yet...
Wait, what? Wonder is just a complex emotion? Like, the fact that it's complex because our brains are able to process more stuff doesn't mean that the same sensation can't be caused in other things. It's just if you shock them in the right place, they will feel the exact same feeling that we feel. The fact that we get it from complex thought is not substantially different from other animals. This is a dumb point.
I think it's fair to say that blackbirds don't look at the sunset and go, my God, that's so beautiful. Did you see that? I want to paint it. I want to remember it. How is it? You know, this sense of literally of marveling. It's the only world we know. When we're born, we don't think, of course, there are 70,000 other globes with much better sunsets. This is the only thing we've ever seen, and yet it staggers us. It surprises us. We're surprised by what is the case, to use the phrase that Wittgenstein loved. You know, the case is everything.
We can definitely surprise animals. Like, you can surprise a dog pretty easily. Like throw a treat at the ground or something. You can surprise lots of things. There are YouTube videos of surprising animals
around us, and we don't know another one, and yet we go, wow. Why should we go wow at what is absolutely ordinary? There must be a reason, I suspect, that we are astonished by the everyday, by the fact of what we see when we look out of the window or when we go for a walk. We're astonished by buds and grass and rabbits and sky and clouds.
Some of what Fry says here will probably ring a very interesting bell for those who are familiar with the discussion surrounding the fine-tuning of the universe. Let me explain.
Throw a pickle at a cat, Dr. Pleroma not. Dr. Pleroma. Throw a pickle at a cat. It's cooked into their DNA to be startled. I've never done this. This sounds like an interesting experiment. Throw a pickle at a cat.
That the universe is not only fine-tuned for life, but even fine-tuned for scientific...
Oh, is it because it looks like a snake? And they're afraid of snakes, maybe.
...discovery is out of question. The bone of contention, however, is whether this is the result of design or of chance. Those who argue for the latter are forced to suggest the existence of billions of other universes, or a multiverse, which is a metaphysical construct that's not accessible to the sciences. However, it's the only...
Oh, like God, you mean? Except the multiverse is at least combinations of principles, particles, and laws that have been demonstrated. Unlike the Sky Daddy, who's made up of stuff that has no evidence, like omniscient, omnibenevolent, conscious.
The only way in which the actualization by chance of this one incredibly improbable universe we live in can be rendered plausible. On the other hand, the argument from design sticks with the one universe that is actually observable. While Fry isn't tapping in...
And the Sky Daddy, which isn't observable, the argument from design is made up from a Sky Daddy that we can't observe. Multiverse is a better explanation here, because the fine-tuning also applies to the Sky Daddy. Like, if you think the universe is finely tuned, because there's many different ways it could be, why is it this one particular way? Well, guess what? The God must also be finely tuned, because there's many different ways the God could be. Why is it that particular way? For each different type of universe, there is a different type of God who could want that universe. Therefore, for every possible universe, there is a possible God. So for the fact that the universe is fine-tuned, God must also be equally as fine-tuned. The universe needs a fine-tuner, so does God. If God doesn't need a fine-tuner, then neither does the universe.
Into this discussion directly, he nevertheless ends up making a point that corresponds to the position that the universe's fine-tuning is due to design, the position which rejects the multiverse hypothesis.
The position with no evidence.
Fry says that as we are surprised by the beauty of the universe we live in and go wow in reaction to it, it doesn't occur to us that there are other universes which could possibly match ours in evoking a sense of wonder. No, this is the only universe we know, says Fry. This is what's absolutely ordinary, as he calls it. And the fact that we marvel at it, are staggered by it, and create art in response to it, cries out for an explanation.
Have you never seen modern art? We create art for all kinds of dumb stuff. Like the fact that human minds are easily distracted by stuff is not evidence of design. It's evidence human minds evolved from evolution and can be manipulated pretty easily. That's why we believe in nonsense So this is not a good argument, saying that, oh, look, humans are entertained by mundane, silly things. Surprise, have you seen YouTube? Cat videos. I don't know. Kardashians? Like, oh God, we're amazed by the Kardashians. This must be evidence of a God. What a dumb argument.
Now, mark Fry's words, because we will get back to this later. Peterson and Fry move on to talk about the problem that such a wondrous universe is at the same time marred with so much suffering and pain. And this is where it gets really interesting. Fry says that while he doesn't actually believe in God, he would argue that if God existed, he would have many bones to pick with him, given the existence of so much seemingly pointless evil in the world. In response to that, Peterson makes a statement that is as surprising as it is powerful.
So then the question is, what's the appropriate attitude, given that the argument you make is actually an extraordinarily powerful argument? And I don't know the answer to that, but I do know, I think, that resentment and anger, and even the motive that would make you want to say that to God himself, I think that's probably not helpful, even though it's so, well, I came to that with great difficulty.
Not helpful. I mean, I guess, I mean, the fact that we're angry at God or whatever, or would be angry at God, is a byproduct of evolution. So evolution gave us this feeling and this hyperactive agency detection system that makes us think there are agents behind things which there aren't agents. And there's lots of benefits for that. But obviously it leads to false beliefs that don't correspond to reality, like, oh, I don't know, religion. But I think the fact that it was evolutionarily advantageous, which led to these strange things like feeling angry at a mythical being, are indirectly beneficial in the fact that they helped us evolve. But I'm not sure what Peterson's saying here.
I mean, I've had my reasons to be resentful and angry, especially recently, and because I'm suffering a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And it makes me resentful and angry and wanting to shake my fist.
Yeah.
But I found upon intense consideration that there was nothing in that that didn't make it worse, and that therefore that must be wrong, even though it's justifiable.
In contrast to Peter,
that doesn't quite make sense. I mean, obviously, in our society today, being angry doesn't benefit you in any way because our society has been designed with safety nets. But from an evolutionary perspective, it had lots of benefits. Like, we were angry and vengeful at one group who attacked us over a different group. And so we retaliated against them, which prevented them from harming us again. And so there were definitely benefits to having these kinds of retributional feelings in the past. Obviously, today, in our current society, they don't do much other than castigate criminals, which keeps them in prison longer. So in a way, they still kind of benefit us. But so Peterson's point here is that they don't do anything other than harm is mostly due to the fact that we've built society with safety nets so that we don't need these feelings anymore. They're not beneficial anymore, whereas they definitely used to be in our evolutionary past.
Peterson, Fry doesn't feel the temptation of resentment in the face of evil and has a very different story to tell.
Because I don't believe in this God, it's not an issue. I'm not really resentful and angry about the fact that there's evil in the world. I'm sorrowful very often, and I'm united in my admiration for the fact and the real belief I have that most people, fundamentally, given this dysfunction or this deep trauma, most people are so good, are so anxious to be good, are deontically good, have a sense of obligation and drive in them to be better than they are. I think that's one of the key things that I love about humanity, is not just that we are dissatisfied with things that are wrong and can be improved, but that with ourselves we are dissatisfied, and that most of us want to be better. I know that's true of me all the time. Every time I go off to sleep, I think, how did I screw up today? How can I be better tomorrow? Why am I so bad at this? If only I could manage that. In moral terms, genuine moral terms.
Yes, I think that's an extraordinarily common experience and very much under noticed.
So what's happened here is fascinating. Fry points out that for himself, as an atheist, there really is no reason to be angry because of evil. The world just happened to turn out the way it is, and there is no all-loving and all-powerful creator to quarrel with over.
What that doesn't make a difference. So I don't like, what is your point here? Yes, we have moral feelings. And if there was a God or an invisible sky daddy who killed lots of people, we would be angry at him. And so it's this, our overactive imaginations where we place agency in things that don't have agency. Like people were angry at a hurricane or angry at the god Poseidon for drowning all of their family. There was no God there. It was just the ocean. They felt anger towards something that wasn't there as a byproduct of evolution. There's no evidence of a God here. It's just basic facts about evolution.
How things are. At the same time, Fry points out that while things are dysfunctional around us, this is not what we seem to be preoccupied with primarily. Instead, what really drives each one of us individually is the urge to become morally better. Peterson agrees but moves on to synthesize things by saying that
I don't think he said morally better. I think he said better. Like people have goals that have nothing to do with morality. I think most human goals have nothing to do with morality, mostly like food and air and stuff. So our drive to become morally better is a secondary emotion that comes way later, way after all our needs are met. If our needs aren't met, we don't really care about morality as much.
this moral drive we feel inside of us, and which Fry emphasized, and the suffering we see around us are actually linked in that we feel the responsibility to make a contribution towards fixing the world we live in. He then gives it a personal spin and hands it back to Fry with an interesting observation.
I mean, your life is characterized by a stellar level of constant productive creativity. That's you, and you're offering that to the world, and that seems necessary. And maybe it's because the problems are real and important, and the role we have to play ethically is of paramount importance, truly.
Yeah.
Why else would we torture ourselves with conscience? And I would say that's the flowering of the religious instinct within you.
The flowering of the religious instinct within Fry, the atheist. Interesting. Now, Fry agreed that his creative, intellectual, and social endeavors could be called that, but he was hesitant to make a definite statement about whether he really does see them as an outworking of his religious instinct. Be that as it may,
it has nothing to do with your religious instinct. People feel this all the time before religion. It was actually these feelings that predated religion, and religion was inspired by them, not the other way around. Like, it's a dumb argument. People had these feelings way before there was any religious nonsense.
Peterson, by referencing Fry's passion to influence culture intellectually and his desire to fight injustice, moves on to make what is probably the most powerful argument of that conversation.
You're disturbed nonetheless at what's, let's say, there's something that's happening in our culture that's not sitting right with you. Okay, how do you defend the damn culture against it without making the claim that we do have something of, let's say, higher value that is the consequence of following a particular tradition?
Yes.
Because without that, you lose the argument instantly.
There's a lot in what Peterson just expressed in those.
I have no idea what Peterson just expressed. Like, what was the point there? Something about how do we defend our society against some set of bad values?
Those three sentences. So let me unpack it for you.
Please.
First, it's important to know that Peterson holds that the values of Western culture are rooted in the Judeo-Christian worldview, and Fry seems to express agreement with that at the previous point in the conversation.
Sure, that's technically true, but the Christian worldview, their values are actually grounded in pre-Christian religions, which were grounded in human society before religion. So all of it's grounded in secular societies. You're stealing from my worldview. You're stealing from the secular worldview that predated religion with all those values, which come from before Christianity.
Second, Fry's life is one long list of accomplishments born out of the passion to fix what is wrong with Western culture. And now what Peterson is saying is that Fry's work only makes sense if Fry also assumes that the values he's defending are really not up for grabs, but that they are higher, as Peterson calls.
No, that's wrong. Even if we just granted all values were subjective, it would still have value to Fry, that Fry is pursuing those values. Like, a stupid argument. Like, people pursue their individualistic values even without some need for an objective value and find their own subjective value in those pursuits. You don't need an objective value. It makes perfect sense even if there's subjective value. It's a stupid argument.
Them that they are not just a matter of human opinion. At another point in the conversation, Peterson states the same thing by saying that moral values are imposed on us from the outside. But here's the stick.
Yeah, evolution. Evolution imposes them, which is why we see them in all kinds of animals, like monkeys and elephants and dolphins. like crows. Like moral values are imposed on us by evolution.
Sticking point. By virtue of assuming that the values of Western culture have an objective existence above and outside of us, you end up affirming that the same is true of the story from which they're born.
Except they're not born from Christianity. So that's a dumb. If that argument is true, well then guess what? The secular societies who invented those before any religion and came up with these ideas and values, whatever they believed must be true must be objectively true. So not God must be true by your own statement, because none of this stuff originated with Christianity. So this is called a genetic fallacy, where you're saying, oh, it came from this thing, so it must be objectively true that this thing is grounded in objective reality because it originates with that thing. No, that's wrong. It also doesn't originate with Christianity. It originates again with atheist secular cultures before religion, because religion was invented by humans. So your argument's true, then the secular societies are correct. Religion is false because they originate in pre-religious societies.
And that's the Judeo-Christian worldview. But as an atheist, that's the exact idea that Fry denies. So how does Fry respond? He mentions practical examples that show how our moral code seems to be quite different from the one of the previous generation, and goes on to say...
And the Bible? Like what the God did in the Bible? Did you forget about that part? That whole drowning babies, destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, sending bears to kill 40 children because they made fun of a bald guy? Like, yeah, slavery, beating your wife. Like, yeah, there's quite a bit of things in the Bible that are morally regressive, that are kind of a point that shows it's not from the Bible.
Say
that's how quickly morality changes. So the idea of the culture is a false one. There is no the culture. It's not like a human version of a biosphere, even, I don't think. There is the state of things as now exist.
Fry claims that it doesn't make sense to speak of the culture whose values he is trying to defend, because those values change all the time. Now, it's not unusual for moral relativists to talk about the existence of different moral codes across times or cultures. But while this is certainly an interesting phenomenon, it does nothing to undermine the argument for objective moral values. By the same logic, one would also have to deny that there are objective facts about the natural world, because scientists disagree with each other all the time about quantum theory, evolutionary theory, and what have you.
That's true. That's a good point from Deflate. Like, the fact that morality changes isn't evidence there isn't an objective morality, just like the fact that science changes isn't evidence that there isn't an objective reality. The fact that it changes doesn't mean that it's not moving towards some objective thing. So that's, Deflate has a correct point there.
Thus, to say that there have been, and still are, different codes of conduct is a truism, but it simply doesn't make for an argument against moral objectivism. Be that as it may, Fry takes the relativist project even further.
Like when you were talking about religion and saying this, this God, that what religion has been brilliant at, and it's needed to be, but so has science, is redefining what God is. What God was in 1400, God was capable of doing remarkable things. He was answerable for everything. And we worshipped him for it. A couple of hundred years later, a few things had been taken away from him, and we could answer for traveling the world and knowing it, and discovering how the stars actually were not holes in a black cloth, but maybe were celestial objects and then a few hundred years later. And similarly, science, we use the word cosmos. Well, cosmos used to mean a very small sphere of a section of the solar system, and now it's some
universe. That's a great point by Fry. So God was used as an explanation for all the crap we couldn't understand, and then God is an ever receding gap of human ignorance that is filled by science. That's true. This is a very good evidence against the God hypothesis. This is a good argument against fine-tuning, because the only place that God actually fits is where science hasn't been yet. And when science gets there, they find no God. Never found God in any of those gaps. And there's actually a further point here that's pretty funny, is that as we move on in philosophy, theist philosophers keep making crap up to like limit God. Like God's omnipotent; he can do anything. Can God lift a rock so heavy he can't? Or can God create a rock so heavy he can't lift it? Well, no, he can't. You can't do that. God's not that powerful. No, he can't do that. What about creating a world without involuntary suffering? No. Free will. He's not powerful to do that. That would contradict his nature. The theists are always like pushing back and changing the definition of God because we can show that the definition of the Bible fails abhorrently. And so you have to special plead or move the goalposts to make your God fit into the blank spots that we haven't proven false yet. So it's a good point by Fry. Three-pointer for Fry.
Infinite thing, and there may indeed be dozens of them, millions of them. Who knows, according to string theory and quantum theory and all kinds of Schrodinger's number and all the rest of it. Everything is redefined in each generation. So what is left that is absolute?
So according to Fry, it's not just that morals are redefined in each generation, but everything is, including scientific terms and even the term God. Now remember that when talking about our marvel and wonder at the universe, Fry was quite adamant about this universe being the only one we know, and about us not going and thinking that there may be thousands of others which might match ours in beauty. However, when making his case against absolutes, Fry is suddenly eager to reference the multiverse. Not a great example of consistency.
That's not inconsistent, Deflate. You're kind of dumb. His argument there was that when we feel wonder, when we look at a sunset and we feel wonder, we don't contrast that feeling to thinking of other universes and thinking there's equally or greater wonderful universes. So he's taking our subjective experience of what we feel when we look at something and saying that in that case, we're not comparing to other universes. Then when talking about like absolutes in science, it's not based on our feelings. Science is based on novel predictions and experimentation and observation and showing stuff isn't imaginary. That part does show that these multiple universes can exist. This isn't inconsistent on Fry's part at all. You're just complaining because he brought up the multiverse and you don't like the multiverse because it debunks your Sky Daddy.
But there are even greater problems with Fry's all-encompassing relativism. He seems to suggest that there are no absolutes because things are constantly redefined. But how does one follow from the other? I mean, up until 20 years ago, the word cloud used to describe those accumulations of condensed vapor in the sky, whereas now it also describes the online space where you save your data. Does this now mean that those other clouds don't exist anymore, or that something about their physical makeup has been altered? Fry seems to think so, but to use the objective fact that languages change as an argument against the existence of objective facts themselves is absurd at best and self-defeating at worst. And this is why Fry's argument against absolutes from linguistics fails utterly. All of this is nothing compared to the final destination of Fry's relativistic project. Listen closely to what he says here.
Everything is redefined in each generation. So what is left that is absolute? And this is where religion has an argument with intellectual progress, because it wants to hang on to something that it believes is eternal and permanent and utterly always true. But there is no such thing.
So religion, according to Fry, is opposed to intellectual progress because it puts the existence of an eternal, unchanging God at its center. Yet there is no such thing that is utterly and always true, says Fry. Oh really? Surely he holds this very proposition to be utterly and always true. And so we're faced with the crazy irony that Fry thinks he can pitch belief in God against intellectual progress by presenting us with a self-contradiction.
No, failed. Buzzer, wrong. So principle of charity, to interpret a speaker's statement with their strongest possible interpretation. Fry isn't literally saying that there is literally nothing that is eternal and absolute, because of like, I'm sure he's going to grant logic that reality is reality. That's going to be eternal and absolute for sure. So he's not saying literally nothing. He's saying there's no known thing like that. There's no absolute in the Bible. The Bible is just a bunch of stuff that they got wrong and it's been changed. They thought it was absolute. They thought it was perfect. They claimed it was perfect, but all of the common knowledge in humans that is granted through that book and all the other books and all other religious texts is tentative and has been changed. So all of the knowledge that we would supposedly gain from these holy books, which is stated as eternal, is actually all changing and has been replaced by better stuff. So the point Fry is making here isn't that there is literally nothing that's absolute. It's that literally nothing in the Bible is absolute. It's all garbage that changed and was replaced by better stuff. All the things that God is supposed to explain in reality is changing and explained by science. So it's not the case that he's saying literally nothing is absolute.
Besides that, if there is nothing that is always true, why does Fry talk about the truth and the principles to be gleaned from religion?
And I see the value and the truth in those religious manifestations, those principles, those elements of my character and the character of the human family.
Remember, Fry went off defending moral relativism as well as a metaphysical kind of relativism in response to Peterson's question of how Fry, as an atheist, could justify his own endeavors to defend the values of Western culture without assuming their objectivity, as well as the objectivity of the Judeo.
That's easy. So we can defend the values of Western culture by saying it works. It produces a good society that keeps people alive and fed and technology and stuff. We don't need to suppose some kind of objective value to Western cultural values. We can just say that they're beneficial. They have an effect that is good, that we like. And even if we granted that Western values are granted in something objective, it wouldn't be from Christianity, because the values in Christianity are predated by other non-Christian things, by secular society. It didn't have religion. So, nope.
Judeo-Christian story in which they're rooted. Fry seems to be aware of the very real and personal dilemma he's facing and cannot but entangle himself in self-contradictions and inconsistencies as he tries to find his way out of it.
It's just being uncharitable to his position because you're not trying to understand it and actually address his argument. Kale, what do I think of panpsychism? I think panpsychism is silly. I don't think that consciousness is fundamental to the universe anyway. It's silly. Consciousness, the only evidence is that consciousness is an emergent property of brains. If you don't have a brain, you don't have consciousness. Therefore, it's unreasonable to think that the universe has consciousness anywhere in it other than the brain.
Contrast, Peterson is in a very different place. He is convinced that the realm of morality is truly above and beyond us, imposed upon us, and not subject to the whims of relativism. He affirms at the same time that the fundamental values upon which Western society is built, such as freedom, dignity, and equality, are inherited from the story told by Christianity. Beyond that, he seriously...
Nope, not from Christianity. It came from before Christianity. Before Christianity was Hinduism and Jainism, which had the same better moral values, actually. And before those were non-religious societies. So all of those values that came from Christianity were actually predated from other non-Christian values.
Seriously entertains the idea that the Christian story may...
Kale, TJump, would you be willing to debate atheism versus panpsychism? Sure. Pay my $50 debate fee and set up whatever, whenever. Just email me.
May have actually been realized historically in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. With that, he recognizes that the Christian myth or narrative differs fundamentally from other religious myths, which...
It doesn't... How does that differ from any other religious myth? Jesus died and rose again. That's actually really common. It happens all the time. Like in Hades, the Greek mythology, you can die and go to Hades and then come back. Like there are dying and rising gods all the time. Like this is not special. And even if dying and rising was special, that doesn't have anything to do with the values. The values have nothing to do with Christianity. The values have everything to do with bettering society, free Christianity. The death part and the rising part doesn't have anything to do with the values in the book whatsoever.
May tell us something true about the world, but which were never claimed to actually have happened in the world. This is what he says in his conversation with Jonathan Pajot that's received quite a lot of attention.
And so what you have in the figure of Christ...
Why is he bobbing his head after every sentence? That's really strange.
Christ is an actual person who actually lived, plus a myth. And in some sense, Christ is the union of those two things. The problem is I probably believe that, but I don't know. I'm amazed at my own belief and I don't understand it. Like, because I've seen sometimes the objective world and the narrative world touch. You know, that's Jungian synchronicity.
I don't get it. Like, yeah. Harry Potter and King's Cross Station, they touch. They're real places. And so the narrative and reality, they come together because it references a real part of the world.
And I've seen that many times in my own life. And so in some sense, I believe it's undeniable. You know, we have a narrative sense of the world. For me, that's been the world of morality. That's the world that tells us how to act. It's real. Like, we treat it like it.
Until it gets replaced by like science or philosophy that gives us a better understanding of morality, and then we won't need the narratives anymore. So narratives are the human shorthand for explaining things that we don't have an actual scientific explanation for yet. And once we do have a scientific or philosophical explanation, then they'll replace the narratives. The narratives are no longer useful. Like, we don't use narratives in math anymore. We don't use narratives in cosmology anymore because it's been answered. We used to. The narratives used to explain cosmology. They used to explain volcanoes and tides. Now we have science for that. So narratives explain things that we don't have good explanations for, gods of the gaps, and then we replace those with actually good explanations when we get them. So when morality comes, we'll replace the narratives of morality with some kind of actual philosophy that describes it rather than narratives. Thank you for the super chat, Jacob.
It's real. It's not the objective world, but the narrative and the objective world touch. And the ultimate example of that in principle is supposed to be Christ.
What? How Christ wasn't even that good? Like, if I was going to list like the most moral human beings to have ever lived, Christ is not even in the top 10. Like, number one would probably be Norman Borlaug. Norman Borlaug created genetically modified wheat. Genetically modified wheat saved billions of lives, literally saved billions of lives. Next would be the guy who invented penicillin and just gave away the patent for free instead of making millions of dollars. I forgot his name now. I knew it for a while ago. But the guy who invented penicillin saved hundreds of millions of lives and just gave it away for free. He could have made millions off of it back then. I don't know what inflation would be like, probably billions. But he just gave it away for free. He invested his life into solving one of the deadliest diseases and gave the patent away for free. That guy was better than Jesus. Jesus didn't do anything. He just preached and got crucified. Like, what did Jesus do? Like, these guys, Norman Borlaug, the human scientists who have saved hundreds of millions and billions of lives through their actual work, those are the real heroes that we should look up to. They're the real moral demagogues that we should actually think about when we're thinking about morality. Like, Jesus didn't do shit. He just some old Jew that got crucified.
But I don't know what to, that seems to me oddly plausible.
Yeah.
But I still don't know what to make of it. It's partly because it's too terrifying a reality to fully believe. I don't even know what would happen to you if you fully believed it.
What Peterson expresses here is what C.S. Lewis famously called myth became fact. In other words, in the person of Christ, the hope for redemption which underlies all stories has been fully realized, and accordingly, new life has been made available to us. It's as if it's too beautiful to be true, which is exactly what seems to touch Peterson so deeply.
Jesus didn't do anything there. What he said is that after you die, you'll get a magical soul thingy, and your magical soul thingy, you'll get the new life, which there's no evidence of. What is this new life that you're talking about? Because there isn't one. It's made up. It didn't do anything. It's fiction. The only people who actually did anything are like the scientists.
And so the difference between Peterson and Fry is that while both affirm the captivating power of religious stories, Fry rejects the idea that the Christian story which underlies the culture in which he lives and whose fundamental values he defends could be ultimate. Not so Peterson. He is open to consider whether the story told by Christianity is actually the story that ultimately establishes the truth of how life is to be lived.
That's so dumb. Like, yeah. So Jesus died on the cross. Christian values are fundamental to America, to American values. Therefore, it must be ultimate. Like, that is the dumbest argument ever. Like, you can literally say the same thing about any other country at any time period in history. Be like, Islam was like the most technologically advanced country in the world in like the 1200s. Does that mean Allah is true? because the values in Islam were the best in their society. What about China? When China was the world's technological leader back in the, like, I forget what time period that was. Does that mean that the Chinese gods were the real ones and the demons and things were real things because their values are grounded in their myths? Like, such a silly argument. Like, your values are grounded in your myths, therefore your myths must be objectively true. Genius. Best argument for theism ever.
If you enjoyed this conversation, you should watch my commentary on Peterson's conversation with Bishop Barron on the question of why people are...
Let's do it. Let's keep debunking.
If the church can no longer attract young people, it has to be that they're not taking that with sufficient seriousness.
Jordan Peterson and Bishop Barron recently had a
kind of like Japan and countries. They can't attract young people. People aren't reproducing enough. So sad.
Conversation in which they pinpointed one particular issue that causes people to walk away from the church. I was pleasantly
drowning babies. That's a big one. The Bible is probably the biggest reason why people walk away from the church, because it's crap.
Surprised and inspired by their findings, which is why I decided to make a video about it, and I hope that you will be encouraged by what I'm about to tell you. My name is Lucas, by the way, and this is my channel Deflate, which challenges skeptics, strengthens believers, and creates a space for awesome discussions about God. You'll find the link to the original conversation between Peterson and Barron in the description box below. It went on for nearly 2 hours, and so I will only be able to give you a summary of what I think is one of its key takeaways. I've left what I believe to be Peterson's most powerful anecdote of that conversation for the end of my video, as it summarizes so well the key point I want to talk about. So
thank you for the super chat, Cosmic. Appreciate it.
So stick with me. Let's get started. At around half...
Oh, Tangelo is in the house. Oh, Tangelo, the guy who understands the least about evolution ever.
Halfway into their conversation, Barron elaborates on the significance of Christ's self-sacrifice on the cross. One of the things he says is that even though man killed God, God returned in forgiving love. This means that divine goodness and forgiveness can trump any evil, and Barron concludes that...
How does that make sense? So let's say he's right that God rose from the dead. Why does that mean it can trump any evil just because it can rise from the dead? Like that doesn't logically follow. Being able to rise from the dead doesn't mean you can trump any evil. There could be like a greater evil after you die. Like saying someone can rise from the dead doesn't automatically mean it can do literally anything. Doesn't make any sense.
That's how Christianity is born. In response to that, Jordan picks up the key Christian notion that we are to become like Christ, to become the ideal, as he puts it. And he understands that this kind of logically implies the confrontation with suffering. In other words, Peterson captures in his own words what the Apostle Paul already taught, which is that if we are to be transformed into the image of Christ, then this means that we are to go through suffering, just as Christ did on his way to the cross. From that, Peterson moves on to say this. Listen very closely.
And this isn't hit home. It's like, look what the church demands everything of you.
Yeah.
Absolutely everything. And the reason that people are leaving is because that adventure isn't being put before them.
Yes.
It's like, look, you can have your cars and your money and all of that, but that's nothing compared to the adventure that you could be going on.
Yes, I wish you'd preach to our people, because I think you're absolutely right about that.
So here is what Peterson is suggesting and why Bishop Barron wants him to preach even louder. The reason why people are leaving the church is because it is not inviting them to the challenging adventure of becoming like Christ, but it is selling a shallow kind of happiness instead. Or to put it simply, it's not because the church makes it too hard for people, but because it makes it too easy for them that they are walking away.
That doesn't make that doesn't make any sense. Like the reason people are walking away, like we can go to the polls. Like what is the poll? Why do most people leave religion? Why do most people leave the church? Why do most people leave religion? Pew Research. Why people left religion. Let's see. What do we got here? Don't believe. 50. disenchanted, not interested, 7%. Views evolved, 7%. Went through a crisis of faith, 1%. Dislike organized religion, 20%. Ouch. Ooh. Organized religion is stupid. That's a big one. Religiously unsure, 18%. Inactive believer, 10%. Other, 1%. Unclear, no answer, 6%. So it seems like the biggest reason is don't believe. That's the 50% of the reason why people stop going to church. Second one is dislike organized religion, 20%. So it has nothing to do with the how hard or how easy they do to make it to be saved. It's because organized religion is stupid. Religiously unsure is another one, 18%. So just not being sure about religion. Yeah, none of these include because it was too easy to be saved. That's not one of the explanations on this Pew Research poll of why Americans left religion behind. Nope, not the correct answer.
We talked a little bit before about the church bleeding its people. They're leaving. The young people are leaving. And my sense of that is it's because the church does not demand enough of young people.
Yeah.
But that's like, that would make the opposite of sense. If you demanded more from young people, I mean, less of them would go. What? Let's demand more of people who are already leaving. That's a great job market strategy here. So we're asking you to work 8 hours a day. You don't want to work for us? Well, we're going to ask you to work 12 hours a day. Yeah. Ask more of them so that that'll make them more likely to stay. Like, what? If you want people to actually come, you have to offer incentives. This is why the government offers incentives for people to do stuff. We're going to give you money if you do it, and then they'll show up. So saying you want to ask more of them to get them to stay, like that makes no sense at all.
Yeah, I think
doesn't
right.
demand enough, and by not demanding enough, it doesn't indicate its faith in their possibility.
Now, when it comes to this notion of faith in the possibility of young people, Peterson moves on to make a very interesting connection to an idea that is unmistakably Petersonian. Everyone who is familiar with his work will love this. It's an idea which, in his public speaking, would always reduce his audience to complete and utter silence, as he himself remembers.
Sometimes that silence can be dramatic, and that's why people say, well, you could have heard a pin drop. It's no one's moving, because their attention is 100% gripped by whatever just happened. And one thing that reliably elicited that was the proposition that the meaning that sustains you and protects you from corruption during suffering is to be found in responsibility.
What are you even talking about? Like, you're more likely to hear a pin drop in a scary scene from a movie. That's what reliably gets people's attention, is movies and stories and stuff. Like what Peterson just said doesn't hold a candle to TV shows.
And people that and I thought part of the reason that produced silence was because no one says that now. They say happiness, or they say rights, or they say privileges, or they say reward, or something like that. They don't say pick up the heaviest load you can carry or care for that matter, and stumble forward.
If you
Whoever said that? When in human history did say, you know what real value is? I want to pick up the heaviest rock and just carry it for miles and miles. That is the greatest value in life. Big rock. Sisyphus. That's the name of the guy who had to push the rock up the hill, right? Sisyphus, rock uphill. Yes, Sisyphus. Sisyphus, as punishment for his trickery, he was made to roll a huge boulder endlessly up a steep hill. Clearly, in the Jordan Peterson worldview, this guy has the greatest life ever. He just picked up the heaviest weight he can. He just goes up a hill, and he just goes down the other side, and goes up a hill again, and it's Jordan Peterson value right there. Sisyphus. Greatest example of Jordan Peterson's value system.
If you followed Peterson on YouTube or read his books, you will know that the notion of you taking responsibility for your life is one of the things, if not the thing, he has become famous for. Now, it seems that in his conversation with Bishop Barron, he takes this exact notion and gives it a Christian spin by saying that according to Christianity, when a follower of Jesus goes through suffering, his or her responsibility is to hang in there and stumble forward on his or her journey toward the likeness of Christ. I might misunderstand Peterson, but he's
such a dumb thing to say. Yeah, we have an all-powerful being, and what we want you to do when you suffer is just hang in there, guys. You know, we have infinitely many resources, all-powerful being. We could definitely give your own universe, like make you happy, but nah, we want you to just hang in there, keep suffering. We want you to make you suffer until you're like Jesus, because that's perfect Christian logic. Like, this is why rich people are Christians, because it's like, you know, we want all the poor people to just keep suffering and not actually ask for anything more. So we're going to like give them a religion to say, so in this religion, suffering is a good thing. You get to suffer and you get to work and not ask for anything more because you'll get it in the afterlife. Genius.
Seems to be compelled by this Christian vision of suffering as it places our struggle and pain within the grand narrative of reality, thus rendering our suffering deeply meaningful.
Yeah, clearly not a coping mechanism here. You know what? How do we get people to like tolerate their suffering and not just give up on life? Well, we're going to give it some kind of story and make it deeply meaningful so that they actually have a reason to tolerate it. It helps them to like cope with the pain, even though there's absolutely no reason to do this. So they're not going to ask for as much stuff because they have this meaning and purpose stuff that's been made up to cause them to motivate them without actually having to give them anything. Genius.
You need to be engaged in something that's deeply meaningful enough to justify the suffering. And so, you know, part of what happens in the story of Christ is the only thing deep enough to justify that level of suffering is absolute immersion in a cosmic drama. And then you ask yourself, well, are we each immersed in a cosmic drama? And it's not so easy to say no to that. It's a life or death situation.
It's pretty easy to say no to that. We are on a pale blue dot. There is nothing in millions of miles, it's just space. So we don't account for anything. Nothing we do is going to change anything. We're not in a cosmic drama. We're a speck of dust in the middle of space. We're little monkeys on the speck of dust.
Now it's important to mention the following. At no point in the conversation does Peterson give even the slightest impression that this notion of us participating in a cosmic drama as we go through suffering should render the suffering itself any less dreadful. Given what he and his family have been through over the past year or so, he knows perfectly well that suffering is as real as anything can be. What he is saying, however, is that the Christian story infuses our experience of suffering with ultimate significance. And while I might be misreading things, I think you can really feel how he wrestles with that tension between the horror and the meaningfulness of our suffering, both of which are realities which the Christian story affirms 100%. At the same time, Peterson is bewildered by the fact that even though the church would have such a powerful story to tell when it comes to the human condition, people are still walking away. And so he asks very innocently why this is so.
Because religion is false and dumb, and the whole organized religion thing is archaic, and we have better moral values and better things that society has done without religion, and so we no longer need religion. That's why people are leaving, because doesn't provide anything anymore. Like, we can get all of the stuff without the religion, which is why most very rich countries have lower levels of religion, because they already have everything they need to be happy. They don't need for someone to justify their suffering in some kind of a cosmic story to justify their existence. They can say, oh, we're happy. We've done this ourselves. Our society has built this happiness without this God thing. We don't have to appeal to a God. We can do it ourselves with science and working together as a society. And so we don't need this fake story thing of this sky daddy anymore, because we can do it on our own. That's why people are leaving, because we have happiness now. We can make people happy without, we don't need to like give them some kind of a justification for their immense suffering. We can just cure their suffering. That's why people are leaving religion. You don't need it anymore.
So then what's wrong with what you guys are doing? Why isn't it working? Well, what's the problem?
It's true that we're not doing enough of that. And I do think we've succumbed a bit to the modern thing, which is a preoccupation with rights and freedom and my individuality and so on.
So Barron agrees with Peterson.
How dare you prioritize yourself with rights and freedoms and happiness? God, it's such a terrible thing to do. No, we must be slaves to the sky daddy and suffer and have no rights and no happiness. No, suffer for the sake of a sky daddy.
that people are leaving the church because we have edited out from our message the challenge of becoming like Christ. This is why he goes on to say,
we dumbed it down intellectually and we lessened the moral demand, for sure, because we didn't want, I think, people to run away. And then, I'll say it bluntly, rather pathetically, we tried to be as relevant as possible. That was the term from our time.
Right, and that's like the uncool guy at the party, man.
Right.
If you have to strive to be relevant, you're not on the cutting edge, that's for sure.
Right.
Now, I couldn't agree more with Peterson and Barron. I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard Christians in general and Christian leaders in particular talk about the need for the church to be relevant. And while people seem to think that this is simply another way of talking about contextualizing the gospel in the 21st century, it's basically code language for we don't have the guts to talk about what it really means to follow Christ. And
yeah, that's because it's so nonsense. Like the values in the Bible are so wrong and so nonsense that people just can't stomach it anymore. Like we don't need this garbage. We can see why it's wrong. That's like one of the largest two reasons. The two biggest reasons why people leave the faith and leave religion is one, scientific inaccuracies, factual inaccuracies in the Bible. Two is moral inaccuracies in the Bible. Those two reasons are the reason people are leaving. And this is a consistent trend throughout history, is that as we go back in time, Christians were more extreme. They were more extreme about following the Bible and scientific illiteracy and literalism and moral badness. And as we progressed morally and progressed as a society, then Christianity had to follow along. It had to make concessions and be less bad and less evil and less crusades, less orthodoxy ruling people and putting people like witch hunts, less of this garbage, because it was unacceptable once we morally progressed to realize this was wrong. And the same thing is happening now. The reason we have like progressive Christianity is because society's moral framework has shifted in such a way that the previous Christian values are now archaic and immoral, and so Christianity is trying to make a new version which adopts and is coherent with the current modern values to make it fit the current modern values, which is the same pattern that's happened throughout time. So the reason the church is trying to stay relevant is because if you stayed like the extremes, like the Bethlehem Baptists or even the Bethlehem Baptists are kind of mundane when compared to like past Christian cultures. And so the fact that the church is trying to blend in common moral values is simply a result of how society works and how moral progress works. Like this isn't a bad thing. That's actually a coping mechanism to keep people in the church. If they stop doing that, more people would leave faster, not slower.
We prefer to lower the bar and water down the cost of discipleship because the easier our standards are, the more people will flock to our church. But there are two problems with this. First, it amounts to preaching what Dietrich Bonhoeffer would have called cheap grace. The true gospel, however, comes with what Bonhoeffer called costly grace, as it invites us to follow the one who gave himself up for us, but also calls us to take up our cross and deny ourselves. And second, I agree with Peterson that people actually want to be challenged. They are looking for an adventure that demands everything of them. Now sure, it's also true that we all like to indulge ourselves. We are all tempted to pursue the comfortable life, or as Peterson would put it, to remain in our parents' basement playing video games instead of taking responsibility. This is why, in their conversation, Bishop Barron pushes back against Peterson and mentions that there needs to be a Gandalf who summons the hobbits out of their hobbit holes, because these holes are just too cozy for Bilbo Baggins and his friends to leave behind in return for an adventure in the wild. In other words, it would be a misreading of human nature to say that we're all unconditionally dedicated to pursuing the challenging life Christ calls us to. However, it is just as fatal a misreading of human nature to think that we're not up for any challenge at all, and it's this second mistake which Peterson and Barron pin on the church. They challenge us to regain confidence in the truth that there is a hero slumbering within us who waits to be awakened. They call the church to stop feeling embarrassed for the fact that following Christ leads through suffering, and they encourage us to tell the actual cosmic drama called Christianity and not a cheapened version of it. Peterson captures this beautifully in that personal anecdote I mentioned at the beginning.
If that story that the church is telling is not being taken up, it's not being sold, there's something about it that's not being sold properly. I'm not saying I have the answer to that.
No, that's true.
You know, but like I saw this kid once when I was in Montreal, and he was about 17 years old, and he was big, like 6'5" guy, and you know, like a physical specimen. And he was standing on the corner of a shopping area, and he had 2 pink shopping bags in his hands, and he looked kind of bereft. And I thought, you know, if you came up to him and said, I've got some heroism in battle for you around the corner.
When you said that, like, I got some heroin, like, wait, what? Wait, what? I'm pretty sure that's what the guy's responding to. Like, you got some heroin? What?
Drop those, and you said it right, he dropped those damn pink shopping bags in a second and be off for the adventure of his life.
Yeah.
And it has to, what is it? Is it a lack of faith, that a fundamental faith that is sapping the lifeblood out of that story? Because you're saying, well, here, I'm calling you to an adventure that's as great as any adventure you could possibly conceive. By definition, this is the ultimate adventure that you're being called to.
Now, I'm moved by Peterson's innocent kind of bewilderment as he rightly discerns the striking discrepancy between the actual story of Christianity and what the church sells as its story. It's also striking that he doesn't claim to have the solution, and he goes on to mention that his point is not even to blame the church, but to simply offer his personal analysis of where modern Christianity is at. I second that, by the way, all the more so as I have to admit that I've been guilty of lowering the bar sometimes and of inviting people to a distorted, happy-clappy version of Christianity rather than to the challenging adventure of becoming like Christ through suffering. Nevertheless, I'm beyond grateful for and inspired by Peterson and Barron, who have pinpointed what I believe to be the key challenge the church is facing today, and I believe we ought to take their message very seriously. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. And
I think you kind of missed the point here. The key challenge to the church is facing today is the Bible. The Bible is the key challenge. What they need to do is get better values and get a better religion that isn't crazy. I've actually been thinking I'd like to start a religion like the religion of atheism, make it based off of my model of morality, my objective morality, and make it around donations instead of giving donations to like whatever churches do. Give it to like science, do scientific discoveries, building on AIs, building for vaccines. Like scientific discovery would be phenomenal, as instead of the stuff that goes into churches fundraising, which is mostly garbage. So yeah, I think that I would like to start a religion, the religion of atheism. I will be the Pope. I will be the Pope of atheism. That would be great. We can start a 501c3 or whatever. We can get some churches. That'd be really cool though. Actually, like if we had churches that were donated to the Church of Atheism, then we wouldn't have to pay like property taxes. That'd be awesome. No property taxes, no income taxes. I guess you still pay income taxes, but donations, you could pay tax deductible donations. The Church of TJump. I think the Church of Atheism is better. I want to call atheism a church, a religion. Atheism the religion would be awesome. Atheists are always boring people. Lol. Lols.
check out Tremendous Suffering.
Be challenged by the story about prayer. No. Yeah. All right, how long have I been going? What are you guys up to? Pope of non-canonism? Non-canonism. I don't know what that means. Ricky Gervais is hilarious. Don't even joke. some of the time. All right, let's see what else this guy's got. Videos. Most popular. That seems unlikely. Let's try this one.
Alex's case is
I want to put forward in this video what I think is the hardest objection to respond to if you're a Christian.
Cosmic Skeptic recently published a video where he talks about what he believes to be Christianity's biggest problem, the problem of animal suffering.
I definitely wouldn't consider that Christianity's biggest problem. Like there's lots of bigger problems than the problem of animal suffering in Christianity, like logical inconsistencies, contradictions, historical inaccuracies, factual inaccuracies. I think there's bigger problems than this one, but it is a big one.
In this video, I'm going to tell you why Alex's case is essentially an emotional appeal that directly contradicts evolutionary theory. But that's not even the half of it, because
it doesn't make any sense. Like, if he's saying this is a problem with Christianity, then why are you making an appeal to evolution here? Like, if this is the biggest problem for Christianity, then evolution has nothing to do with it. Like, what?
What you're about to witness is how Cosmic Skeptic's biggest shot against Christianity surprisingly turns into his most powerful argument for it. This is going to be very exciting. Hi, my name is Lucas and this is my channel Deflate, which challenges skeptics, strengthens believers and aims to create great conversations about God. Guys, it is super important to me to make clear from the start that I really respect and appreciate Alex, and that everything I'm about to say is meant as an engagement with his worldview rather than as an attack against him personally. Now you have to know that the case Alex puts forward has nothing to do with animal suffering which is inflicted by humans. Instead, he exclusively focuses on the suffering wild animals endure apart from human involvement. And you're about to hear plenty of examples of that from Alex himself. His claim is essentially that the existence of an all-powerful and all-loving God is implausible given the amount of pain animals have to live with in the natural order created by God. And since there are literally trillions of animals, the problem of animal suffering is, according to Alex, even bigger than the problem of human suffering. Or as he puts it,
if the problem of suffering is historically one of Christianity's biggest problems, then the problem of animal suffering is its biggest.
Here is how he starts his case.
So I should probably begin by unpacking why animal suffering is such a problem worth addressing in the first place. If human life is, as I've argued, infused with pain, then non-human animal life is defined by pain.
Okay, let's pause here for a moment. I don't know where Alex gets this idea that animal life is defined by pain. I mean, are we really to
I mean, that's a pretty simple thing to understand. Like, animals experience a significant amount of pain in their life. Like, it's mostly pain. Like, most animals don't really get to live like pets in our houses. Like, if we think of even cows and pigs and chickens, like most of their life is suffering. Most of them get killed and tortured like most of their lives. And that doesn't include wild animals who are starving to death every single day and who have to fight for their life to find food. And every corner they go around could get eaten or destroyed. And when they get like things in their foot, splinters or broken ankles, they just have to live with it. There's no doctors they can go to. They don't have health insurance. Like, most animals' lives suck. They are super painful and just horrible. The few animals that have good lives are the ones that like humans take care of because they like them. Like, animal lives are defined by suffering because it's mostly suffering. This isn't a hard point to understand here, Deflate guy. Like, it's a pretty non-controversial point.
Believe that the thing that defines a dolphin, a butterfly, or a chimpanzee is the experience of pain? Why is this the ultimate identity marker for what it means to live as an animal? Why not the urge to reproduce or the urge to feed? No, it's pain, says Alex, and we're gonna see later that this directly contradicts evolution.
That wasn't an argument, you idiot. He's not literally making the argument that their life is literally defined by pain. It's just it's meant to accentuate the fact that pain is a significant portion of their lives. How are you this dumb? Like, what do you think he's literally saying that literally their lives are literally defined by literally pain? Like, how don't you get his point here? Like, his point is pretty simple. Like, there's lots of pain in the lives of animals. That's all it means. That is the principle of charity. Like, holy shit.
Theory. But let's indulge Alex for a moment and see why he thinks that pain is the real deal.
Animals in the wild are subject to endless torment from all angles of their existence.
Yeah, sure, I totally buy that. No, I mean, come on, seriously? Does Cosmic Skeptic really think that we're gonna fall for his emotional appeal? That all animals from the moment they're born until they die are endlessly tormented? Man, and I always thought Alex doesn't believe in hell. Yeah, I mean, look at these. The torment is tremendous. Or here, torment from every angle of their existence. I mean,
how are you so dumb? Like the point here isn't that literally every second of every day they're literally tormented. Like, I think you just don't understand figurative uses of speech here. Like the point here is that yes, animals suffer a lot. Those animals you pointed to are probably going to starve many times in life. They're probably like half of the animals you showed are probably going to get eaten or killed by other animals, or ripped apart, or killed by their parents, or killed by other parents. Like, yes, there is a lot of suffering here. It's not literally endless, but Cosmic's point wasn't that it was literally endless. You just don't know how figurative uses of speech work. Like, principle of charity. This seems to be like a running theme with this guy. He just doesn't understand the principle of charity. It's like, interpret the speaker's statement in the most rational way possible so you don't look like an idiot. Because right now you look like an idiot. Like, are you just so dumb you don't understand the meaning of a statement? Or do you think it literally means endless? Is it like he can't literally be endless since they die at some point. So clearly he didn't literally mean endless torment. What a stupid point to make. Like, what?
Consider that while you're watching this video, every wild animal is being tormented every single second of its life. God is so mean. But Alex isn't done yet.
They suffer from predation by other animals. Wild dogs disembowel their prey. Venomous snakes cause slow internal bleeding and paralysis. Crocodiles drown large animals in their jaws.
Now, the topic of predation features very prominently in Alex's talk, and he makes a big deal.
And Hadassah, I've emailed him. I just haven't heard back. I don't think this guy debates. Like, I've never heard this guy debate.
Out of the fact that animals can die a violent death as a result of it. I will pick this up.
Most animals die of violent deaths. Animals don't usually die of old age. Not usually a thing. Old age is a human thing. Most animals die of hunger, starvation, stress, predation. Like, most animals do not die of old age. They mostly die of suffering and pain and death.
Up later and show you why in his emotional fervor Alex completely misses the point here. Finally,
right, and animals.
What was the point? How is he missing the point? The point is that they suffer a lot. They do suffer a lot. He's just getting the point right.
Also suffer from rampant disease, dehydration, and starvation. They have to contend with forest fires and floods and a whole manner of other terrifying natural disasters.
Oh boy, I mean, yes, you're right. Look at the dehydration these elephants suffer while they are being endlessly tormented.
Oh my God, how is he this dumb? He's like, some animals don't have dehydration at some points in the year. Hey, when there's water and the rainy season happens, elephants, they're not dehydrated. Lucky elephants for that brief few months that there is water, not the summer, not when they're in the desert, because there are elephants who do drown and who do die of dehydration. Like, what? This is like that stupid Republican argument. There can be no global warming. Look, there's snow outside. Clearly no global warming. Clearly, look, there's elephants in water. So no animals have ever died of dehydration. What a stupid argument.
By the lack of water. Oh, clearly, Alex is spot on. Now, maybe this was cheap, I'm sorry, but please allow me to explain myself. First, my point is not to make fun of Alex because he cares for animals, not at all. I am the truly happy father of a 9-year-old boy, my son Aaron, who has single-handedly organized over 30 kids at his school into a Safe Green and Save Animals advocacy group, and leads them in picking up trash and helping worms, bugs, and ants in the school courtyard. I feel nothing but gratitude and respect for the drive he has, and I can honestly say that his passion challenges me. In the same way, the authentic example Alex sets when it comes to caring for animal well-being unsettles me in a very positive sense. In fact, I've told my son Aaron about Alex, and I have explained to him that we can learn an awful lot from Alex.
Is there a point coming?
Let's
Is there a point coming sometime? Or is this just like a cameo of your son? Is there a point coming?
save animals.
So yes, that's my son, and again, my point is not to make fun of Alex. But what I want you to catch is this: Alex's case is essentially an emotional appeal that seriously lacks nuance. Now, given that Alex...
This is not an emotional appeal. So God is perfectly moral. God causes an inordinate amount of unnecessary suffering, therefore God is not perfectly moral. Like this is not an appeal to emotion. There's no emotion here. Animals suffer. Suffering is bad. Therefore, God isn't good because he could have prevented it and didn't. This is not an appeal to emotion.
Alex feels passionate about animal well-being, it's only natural for him to throw his emotions into the mix. In fact, I have pointed out in another video that I highly respect Alex for not just engaging in disinterested armchair philosophy, but for actually living out the stuff he talks about. So my criticism applies not in the slightest to Alex as a person, but to
still waiting for a point here.
Alex's case, which essentially presents us with a one-sided story replete with emotions. You know, if Alex wouldn't have gone all emotional on us with his talk of the endless torment and insidious levels of unthinkable suffering endured by animals, but presented a factually more accurate picture of how sentient existence actually plays out, his case wouldn't even be half as appealing.
Okay, so you're stupid. You take the statements to be literal when they're not meant to be literal. They're figurative statements. Therefore, his argument is bad because you're a dumbass. That's not how this works. Like, principle of charity, you have to interpret the speaker's statement in the most rational way possible. Otherwise, you're the dumbass. It's not their fault. Not their fault. They don't literally say every little literal argument they're making in a formal syllogism that's perfectly sound and valid. No, you need to interpret what they're saying to understand the point that they're making, not take their literal words as if their literal words are the literal argument. Like, what? No, it can be figurative because they can use words figuratively. Figurative language is a thing. How is this guy this dumb?
Philosophical arguments simply don't work that way, and we are about to see how Alex's ideas directly contradict evolutionary science, which Alex hijacks to make his case.
How does anything he said contradict evolution? Yes, suffering is a thing. Animals die. That was the point. The whole point he's made and all the clips he's shown is that animals suffer a lot. This is bad. Evolution doesn't contradict evolution in any way. Evolution doesn't have any moral system there. It's like, oh, suffering isn't bad. It's totally fine to suffer. Like, evolution doesn't say that. This is not a contradiction with evolution.
But first, I just want to point out what's at stake here, and this is critical. Remember,
what's at stake is showing that the Christian God is immoral. That's what's at stake. So if the Christian God existed and he created all this unnecessary suffering to animals, he's a cruel monster and you shouldn't worship him. That's what's at stake. So stop believing in a moral monster.
That, according to Alex, animal suffering is not just any old problem Christianity faces, but it's historically its biggest problem. He claims that it's far easier to explain the tremendous amount of pain plaguing animals against the assumption that an all-loving and all-powerful God does not exist.
Now, pause. Think about this. What would we expect to find if we assume that there is no God, and animals in nature are just randomly mutating and evolving and competing for resources with no divine guidance? Well, we'd expect pretty much exactly what we observe in the real world, a messy bloodbath and a struggle for survival. And what would we expect to see if we assumed the existence of an all-loving and all-powerful God? Maybe some level of suffering that we might not be able to fully explain, but nothing even remotely approaching the level of horror and pain that actually exists in the natural world.
That's a good argument. So that is a pretty good argument overall. Yeah, there's lots of gratuitous suffering that it doesn't need to be here and there's no benefit. And God could have prevented it and gotten all of the benefits without it. And we can prove this. And as I have done in my moral model, we can show that we can get all of the involuntary suffering gone and get all of the possible benefits. But yeah, that's a good argument. This isn't an appeal to emotion here. This is just basic logic.
It is
Basic logic is an emotion, probably in Christianity. Logic doesn't work. It's just you're appealing to emotion.
Incalculably easier to account for this suffering on an atheistic worldview.
Now let's apply Alex's logic to the following hypothetical scenario. Let's say we happened not to find a messy bloodbath and that it was not the case that animal life is defined by pain. But instead, we found a world in which animal life happens to be defined by pleasure. A world in which animals are not endlessly tormented in an earthly hell, but where they are alive and well, healthy and happy, and enjoying themselves, in a kind of earthly heaven instead. Such blissful animal existence would not, according to Alex's own logic, constitute the biggest problem of Christianity, but the biggest problem of atheism. Because if it is incalculably easier to account for the suffering, that is, the horror and pain that actually exists in the natural world on an atheistic worldview, it also holds that it would be incalculably harder to account for a happy animal existence on an atheistic worldview.
That's actually correct. So if there was no suffering or extremely little suffering, and most animals, everything was happy and lived long lives and didn't die without their consent, and everything was consensual. Yeah, that would be a decent argument. Like a random universe with no creator creating a perfectly moral place would be very unlikely. So if we saw a perfectly moral universe with no involuntary suffering, that would actually be a good argument for a god or a designer of some kind, because it's going to take a designer to actually build the best of all possible worlds, because we're not just going to get there magically. But yeah, that would be a good argument. But guess what? Animals' lives are defined by pain and suffering. They're mostly pain and suffering. They mostly die cruel, unpleasant deaths. They're not happy. This is not a heaven. This is a hell. Maybe we should just make this guy live as an animal. Like, you have to live as a lion. Live as a lion on the Serengeti. You see how much happiness it is. Let's try it. Or a hyena. Have you seen the hyena's reproductive system? Like, the women hyenas have a penis. It's bigger than the men's penis, and they give birth through it. This is not a pleasant process. Most animals live very painful, suffering deaths. They're usually infected by disease most of their lives. They break things and suffer for their entire lives without it ever getting healed because they have broken bones. Look, this is not a hard thing to imagine. We just give you the average life of an animal. It's pretty miserable. Pretty miserable. You would not enjoy this. It makes a lot of sense to say there's no God and it's just a random mess based on the average life of most animals throughout most history. Like 99.999% of all species are dead and died painfully. You know, like the whole volcanoes that cause boiling hot ash to get into their lungs and just cook them from the inside. Super pleasant. Or like asteroids that hit the planet and block out the sun and cause them to suffocate to death. Meh. Totally fine. It's like a heaven, as Deflate put it, like a heaven.
And at the same time, incalculably easier to account for it on a Christian worldview. Now, mark these words as we're finally moving from cosmic skeptics' emotional drama to actual scientific theory. I'll be citing an accomplished Austrian academic called Martin Balluch, who has studied applied mathematics, astronomy, physics, and theoretical physics. He has taught and done research at Cambridge and other universities. But there is more, and this will be of particular interest to Alex. One of the PhDs Dr. Balluch holds is on the philosophy of animal rights, and he has moved on to become a prominent animal rights activist in Europe. He's co-founder of what is one of the most influential associations against animal factories in the German-speaking world, the Verein gegen Tierfabriken, which I used to support in my early 20s. Balluch has led countless campaigns for animal rights and has received international awards for his efforts. Now,
I love this guy's quote, Inspire 1000. All of you are blind and delusional and foolish, which is ironic since he's posting a comment that we must necessarily be able to read. So we have to be able to see it. So we're all blind based on a comment that we must read to know that it's there. Meh. Telling a blind person they're blind through text is genius.
Now here is what he says. Being just back from a trip with the tent into the wilderness, I realized once again the truth of the statement, most wild animals are happy most of the time. I say that because I keep seeing animals in the wild and they almost always seem content and happy. Some are frolicking.
Oh God, that's such a dumb argument. Oh man. Wow. Like if you go to a dog that's like dying on the road and go to pet it, its tail will be wagging because it's near you. This is not, it's happy. Like if you see a panther in the wild and it's staring at you, doesn't mean it looks happy. It could be starving to death and it's like food, so it might be excited to see you. But no, most animals aren't happy most of the time. Nope, they just die very quickly.
Flicking in the sun, some are playing, some are making love, some are resting and simply enjoying themselves. In only very rare occasions do I see animals who are suffering. Well, I would not have thought this statement to be remarkable, but for some people it is. For people like Alex, you mean? Let's continue. My primary argument for the above statement that most
animals through most of their lives carry disease. Most of them are dying. Most of them don't live past any reasonable age. Most of them don't reproduce. Most of them don't have happy existences. Most of them starve to death. That's such a dumb argument.
Animals are happy most of the time is not just my observation, but also from evolution. Being happy is an important psychological state for animals in order to be healthy.
So your argument here is that, well, if evolution gives you a sufficient amount of dopamine, well, that totally makes all of the cancer and disease and hunger and dying totally fine. Like, if God gives you enough dopamine, then clearly this is evidence of God, that not evidence of evolution. Because if God made a world where, like, if everything was just happy, we saw a world of just happiness everywhere, clearly this is evidence of God, right? What? Dopamine making people feel happiness doesn't mean the suffering isn't there. What a stupid argument.
The animal has not just a much better immune system, he or she is also active and inquisitive. Being happy and content is a vital ingredient to procreate and to live safely and long. Hence, evolution will produce animals who are mostly happy. Of course, if you assume evolutionary theory, this makes complete sense, doesn't it? Happiness is the psychological state most conducive to survival, which is why evolution will produce happy animals, rather than animals that are all sad and terrified because Alex believes them to be tortured day and night, which they obviously aren't. Hence the title of Baluch's article, Most Wild Animals Are Happy Most of the Time. Finally, Baluch states, it is true that most animals die a violent death in the wild, but that does not contradict the above statement. If I am killed today, I would still have lived a mostly happy life. Remember, I told you that while the issue of predation is a big deal for Alex, he misses the point completely, and Baluch exposes plainly and clearly why this is so. The 1, 2, or 3.
This doesn't support your argument. So your argument here is that, well, the happiness of most animals' lives is evidence of a God because, well, even though most of them die horrible deaths, they were happy most of their lives. Clearly, this is a genius argument. This is like a factory farming argument where, like, it's totally fine that we kill all the cows because we gave them a happy life, so we get to kill them and eat them. It's perfectly fine, perfectly moral to create them and then let them live happily for X number of years so we can eat them later. What? What a stupid argument.
3 minutes of pain an animal may experience before it dies does not negate the fact that it has led a happy existence for years.
It does if there's an all-powerful being who could stop that from happening. It definitely does.
Years before that. And by the way, there are trillions of animals who die year in, year out of old age or some sort of disease without experiencing any significant pain whatsoever.
They die from disease with no significant pain whatsoever. Genius, just absolute genius. And no, most animals don't die from old age. What a silly question. What a silly thing to say. They don't die from old age.
So let's put all the pieces together. According to Alex, animal life is supposedly defined by pain. a gloomy existence of endless torment in an earthly hell. He tells us that, of course, this is pretty much exactly what we'd expect to find if we assume that the all-loving and all-powerful God of Christianity does not exist, and he calls this Christianity's biggest historical problem. What is his case built on? Mainly on emotions. In contrast, Ballo shows, not by emotional appeal, but on the basis of his own observation, experience, and chiefly the scientific theory of evolution, that animal life is defined not by pain, but by pleasure, as evolution will produce animals who are mostly happy, frolicking in the sun, playing, making love, resting, and enjoying themselves. You might describe this as an earthly heaven. So to say that Alex has gotten reality upside down when he told us that animal life is defined by pain is an understatement. Actually, the exact opposite seems to be true, that animal life is defined by pleasure. Now remember, it's Alex himself who asserted that it is incalculably easier to account for this suffering on an atheistic worldview. What he meant by this suffering is the messy bloodbath.
This is funny. So yeah. Thank you for the super chat, David. Appreciate it. Thank you for loving my content. It's awesome. So this is Deflate's view of animal life. What life is like for ants in Deflate's worldview?
Path we supposedly observe in the real world, which, according to Alex, is what we would expect to find if we assume that there is no God. Well, the only problem is that we don't actually observe this suffering in the real world, but only in the fictional world Alex has orchestrated for us in his emotional drama. What we do observe in the real world is that animals are, as science tells us, almost always content, suffering in only very rare occasions and happy most of the time. Thus, if Alex is to apply his very own reasoning consistently, he would have to agree that it is incalculably harder to account for this happiness on an atheistic worldview.
No, it's not. This makes perfect sense under evolution, as explained by the guy who you just quoted. In evolution, it's beneficial to create things that are happy. With an all-powerful being, it makes no sense to make tons and tons of suffering. It just no sense at all. With an all-powerful, perfectly moral being, the amount of suffering in the world makes zero logical sense. You have to be an idiot to think that there is an all-powerful, all-good being who created this world. That's dumb. Alex's argument makes perfect sense here. Yours makes no sense. Deflate is wow. Is wow.
Because it's the very opposite of what we'd expect to find if we assume that there is no God. At the same time, according to Alex...
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Appreciate the super chat of 5 PLN. I don't know what PLN is though.
Alex's logic, it is incalculably easier to account for this happiness on a Christian worldview, because it is, as Alex himself tells us, exactly what we would expect to see if we assumed the existence of an all-loving and all-powerful God. That is, some level of suffering that we might not be able to fully explain, but most of all, happiness. So where does this leave us? It leaves us staring at the rubble of Alex's supposedly biggest case against Christianity, which has utterly collapsed under the weight of reality.
Wow, this guy's had some crazy delusions. Like somehow the fact that most animals are delusionally happy while they're suffering and starving to death with disease and are going to get eaten, vast majority of them are going to get eaten and die of miserable deaths. Well, that's totally fine. That's not evidence against God. No, clearly not. God made this all this enormous amounts of suffering and death. Meh. Well, they get some dopamine in their lives. They get lots of dopamine. Clearly, dopamine, therefore God. Best argument ever.
A reality that is infused with far more beauty and goodness than Alex imagines. Or to borrow a term from the most prominent atheist thinker turned Christian in the 20th century, we may say that Alex's case has collapsed under the weight of glory.
You know what's actually collapsed under the weight of itself? The Bible, Christianity, all of the evidence, all of that's collapsed under the weight of its own stupidity. That's what's really collapsed.
In other words, and I find this to be truly beautiful, Cosmic Skeptic, one of the biggest atheist YouTubers, in putting forward his biggest case against God, has offered us and himself his own most powerful case for him. Now I submit it's on Alex to follow the evidence and the logic of his very own case.
So this is the most powerful argument for God, that animals get dopamine. So even though they die miserable deaths, the fact that they get dopamine and happiness and feelings of happiness is evidence of an all-powerful, all-good being who lets them die miserable deaths. How are you this dumb? Like this, like wow, just wow. Thank you for the super chat, Chris. We are little monkeys on a blue speck of dust. So true. Absolutely, absolutely. The blue speck quote from Carl Sagan. Blue speck. That was a good one.
It's where it leads.
Ariel, am I a vegan? No, I think it's moral to be vegan. I just don't care, and I'm fine with being immoral. But it is moral to be a vegan. I'm just not moral.
That is, to the cross of Christ, where the God he tried to argue against supremely revealed who he is. The all-loving source of the beauty and goodness we and the animals get to experience in the world he created. If you enjoyed this video, can I please ask you to share it with as many people as possible? Given that my channel is still pretty small, this video would never get as many views as Alex's original video. So please help me to push this out as much as possible. That would be super awesome.
What he said, all that stuff that he just said about the liking, subscribing, do that stuff. Share, like, subscribe, and stuff. All right, thanks guys. I'm gonna head out. It's fun hanging with you guys. Thanks for watching. Join the Discord if you'd like to host your own conversations on my Discord and annoy some theists. That would be great. Have a nice day. Peace out.